In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
The first indication of the Syrian regime's interest in purchasing nuclear research facility came to the notice of the Israeli and Western countries in the late 1990s. Towards the end of the elder Assad's rule, however, Israel began to pay serious attention to that inclination only after the discovery of a serious intelligence gap in another country, Libya. On December 19th, 2003, a Saturday morning, I turned on the radio and I heard on a news broadcast that the Americans and the British had persuaded Libya to dismantle its nuclear program, says Aman Soufran, who was then the head of the intelligence division of the Mossad. The next morning, I assembled my people and we said we had experienced 2 total failures here. We had absolutely no idea that such a program even existed. And second, we didn't know that negotiations to dismantle it had been going on for 8 months. We started to back analyze the Libyan program and try to figure out where else in the region similar programs could be hiding. According to Soufran, after a month and a half of investigating, the Mossad research team concluded that Syria was working on a nuclear program of its own. The Mossad Intelligence Division distributed a document with an assessment to that effect in February 2004. Mir Dagon was skeptical about its findings. Syria was not a top priority for Mossad activity, and the assessment did not constitute a breakthrough in gathering of substantial proof. A similar possibility regarding Syria was also considered during those years at the research branch of military intelligence. In 2005, Colonel Eli Ben Mir had taken up the position of head of technology field in the research branch. Quote, Iran was the focus of our interest, unquote. Soufran says now, but we delegated a team of researchers to examine the possibility of a nuclear program in Syria. All the intelligence people knew, Bashir told me, it's not like Bashir. When you put researchers on a project, if there's something, they will find it. In the course of the examination, the research identified the cube at a distant and isolated site called Ali Khyber, less than a kilometer west of the Euphrates River. The cube aroused their interest in particular. It was a square building with an area of about 1,600 square meters, more than 17,200 square feet, which was about 20 meters, close to 66 feet high. We had satellite pictures of a large building in the middle of the desert with no explanation, says MI chief at the time, General Amos Yadlin. The Cube, a large cubicle building that was still under construction in the heart of the Syrian desert, not far from Deir el-Zawar, was the focus of the Israeli defense establishment starting from the end of 2006. Very quickly, it was given the name The Cube. As the months went by, the suspicion grew that beneath the broad roof of the building hid President Bashir Assad's secret flagship project, a nuclear reactor produced in North Korea intended to provide the younger Assad with the achievement that had eluded his father, Hafez Assad, on the battlefield and between wars, and to lead towards a point of strategic balance that could cancel out Israel's clear military and technological advantage. We got a great one tonight. That's from a book called No Longer a Secret, How Israel Destroyed Syrian's Nuclear Reactor by Haaretz and Amos Harel and Aluf Benn. I guess I kind of just blew the end of the story for you.
Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Hey everybody, I'm John. This is the Abercast. Thank you for tuning in. So we're going to be talking about this Israel's mission to destroy Syria's secret nuclear reactor tonight. The featured books are Israel's covert mission to destroy a secret Syrian nuclear reactor. Excerpt from a new book, Shadow Strike, by Yaakov Katz, and No Longer a Secret, How Israel Destroyed Syrian's Nuclear Reactor by Haaretz, Amos Harel, and Aluf Benn. So if you're playing along at home, we're just going to get right into it. If you're playing along at home, now is the time. I would like for you to summon your vessel of the art and mix up your favorite weapon of mass distraction and raise that motherfucker to the sky. And I want to toast all of my Patreon and Subscribe Star supporters. Thank you all very much. So here's to you guys. Thank you for your support. Under the cover of darkness, the pair of CH-53 Sea Stallion helicopters flew low to evade radar detection. Inside, the commandos, disguised as Syrian soldiers and armed with AK-47s instead of their usual M16s, were doing one last review of their equipment. The heavy lift choppers carried old and camouflaged Syrian modeled military jeeps, which the troops planned to use for transportation once they were on the ground. It was August 2017, and military intelligence chief Yadlin had crafted a plan to send elite commandos into the IDF's General Staff Reconnaissance Unit, better known by its Hebrew name, Sayeret Matkal. We talked about these guys before. Deep into Syria, it would be one of the top 5 covert ops he ran as the head of Amman. The mission was complicated: to get as close to the reactor as possible and to return home with pictures and soil samples. No one could know that the Israeli soldiers had even been there. Covert operations like these need to first be approved by the Prime Minister. Yadlin had explained that while the photos obtained in the Mossad raid were impressive, many of them were a few years old. And it was true that the IDF had daily satellite imagery of the site, but that was not enough to know what exactly was happening there. Israel wanted to know if the fuel rods had been installed, an important indicator for determining how close the reactor was to becoming hot. Beyond the intelligence collection, the raid served another purpose: to prove that the IDF could reach the site on ground. The cabinet needed to know what its options were and whether a ground operation was one of them before approving the attack. The helicopter pilots could see the small canyons rising above the Syrian desert and the tranquil water of the Euphrates off in the distance. Behind the transport helicopters carrying the commandos were attack helicopters, as well as a rescue chopper with a team from the IDF's Elite Airborne Search and Rescue Unit on standby in case something went wrong. An airborne command plane tasked with intercepting Syrian military communications was circling high above, far out of reach of any radar or surface-to-air missile system. For missions of this kind, Syrian Mekal usually has months to prepare. Sometimes operators get assigned to a mission a year in advance. Depending on the complexity of the operation becomes their lives. They train for it, they build mock targets to practice, they live and breathe the operation, but sometimes the mission gets nixed. Military statistics show that a Syrian Mekal operator usually trains for 3 to 4 special operations during his military service. 50% get canceled. Sometimes it is the political echelon which changes its mind for its new intelligence that comes in and changes the original operational requirement for mechalists, the nickname for operators in the unit. There is nothing more frustrating. Syrian Mekal, which operates under Amman, is known for some of Israel's most breathtaking operations. Mechalists were behind the successful raid of Entebbe, Uganda in 1976 to free a group of Air France hostages during the 2006 Second Lebanon War. The commandos ran a number of special operations. One brought them deep into Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, a known Hezbollah stronghold, where the IDF wrongly thought the 2 abducted reservists were being held. Other operations included sabotaging Iranian arms convoys en route to Hezbollah. For this mission, the battle procedure was shorter, a result of a narrow window that existed between learning of the reactor and the deadline for attacking it. The training began in early June and lasted a month and a half. The IDF Information Security made the operators sign special confidentiality forms, as they did before every special mission. Mechalists were used to telling their families they would be away for a couple weeks, and after returning, not being able to say a word about where they had been or what they had done. Every few days, senior officers showed up to take part in the training or to see with their own eyes as the operators ran through the model one more time. Before the mission, as always happened, a conversation broke out about the weight each commando should carry in his kit, whether it was more or less important to load up on firepower or scouting and camouflage materials. The commandos boarded the helicopter knowing that as soon as they hit the ground, they would be on their own. If something went wrong, the chances of getting rescued were not particularly high. The helicopters dropped them a few dozen kilometers away from the reactor, and the rest of the way they made in jeeps and on foot. Mechalists are expert navigators and spend a good portion of their training learning how to get places with nothing more than a compass, and sometimes even without. A lot of the preparation for this mission was used studying the terrain in Syria so that they would be able to find their target. On missions like this, the commandos usually split into different groups. A small squad of scouts goes ahead, leading and clearing the way. Every half an hour, the commander orders a planned stop. In between, the commandos suck water out of long straws extending from between the straps of their bags and munch on energy bars, the wraps of which they stick in the pockets so not to leave anything behind. The scouts remain about 100 meters ahead of the main force before entering a new area. The commander of the scout force presses twice on his two-way radio, an agreed-upon sign that it is safe for the rest of the forces to proceed. As Israel's top commandos, mechalists get whatever equipment they need: night vision goggles, anti-tank missiles, explosives, and satellite communications are the basics. The unit also has a tactical team that builds specially tailored weapons and hardware. The operators had been briefed by the geologists and the scientists before the mission. They were told what to look for, what samples they would need to bring back, and when they were close enough to the reactor. The team leader gave the order, and a few of the soldiers started filling the plastic boxes with dirt and soil and plants. They had to dig deep to get the right samples. Radioactive exposure was not a concern. Israel was looking for tiny traces of uranium that would have naturally scattered during the reactor's construction. The core part of the mission took just a few minutes. When they were done digging, another soldier walked around with a device that looked like a small broom to make sure they hadn't left any tracks, so it was a small broom. The last thing they needed was a Syrian army patrol discovering the holes a few days later. Nothing could be left behind. The force commander gave the signal, and soldiers headed back to the pickup point. When they crossed back into Israel, Mert received an update, and he let out a massive sigh of relief. A few days later, the lab results came back. The soil samples were positive. Now, there were no doubts about the site. This was definitely a nuclear reactor. At the same time, though, Israel received a stark reminder that time was running out. The reactor was on its way to becoming hot. If there was going to be an attack on it, it had to be soon. All right, we're going to switch to this next book. No longer a secret. In the meantime, final preparations were underway in the Air Force. The force, they were worried about a series of possible complications during the attack, ranging from the presence of a concealed battery of anti-aircraft guns in the area of the reactor to the concern that it was not possible to determine with certainty that the reactor would be destroyed in a single sortie. So that second one, immediately following the first one, might be needed to complete the mission, this time under more complicated circumstances in which the aim of the operation had already been revealed to the Syrians. According to David Makovsky, a researcher at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, in addition to the 8 attack planes, a number of other aircraft also took part in the operation. The planes took off from Ramon and Hartzerim and headed northward along the shore of the Mediterranean with ample use of electronic warfare as camouflage. We set out at 10:30 p.m., recalls Amir. It's a very long flight, secret on the dark night in a low altitude of 100 meters above sea level. You have to make all kinds of split-second decisions. Mostly it went according to plan, but not everything. The weather along the way surprised us in a number of places. We had to figure out an answer on the spot according to what we had agreed upon in advance. There was no communication between planes. We maintained complete silence during the flight, and each of us solved things in his own cockpit. After dilemmas and misgivings, in one plane, a problem was solved after it had become clear that all the systems were working. We were flying in a hostile area. If the ground-to-air systems wake up, you are in a viper's nest. But the flight to the target was relatively calm, without our getting discovered and without any direct threat. And then you get to the target area. You climb a bit higher, pulling into execution mode. Everything goes according to the advanced briefing. Each plane drops 2 bombs. You feel a slight shaking of the wings as they are released. And there is a bit of excitement before the bomb hits. We make certain 5 times that it was all systems go. Even today, he remembers the point of impact. Everything happens within a few seconds. I see on the thermal system I have on the plane and also outside. The bombs are hitting the structure. There is a tremendous explosion. What you see in the darkness, and after that, total destruction. The target gets covered in smoke, and afterwards you see that it has been demolished. We were over the target for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we started to fly back in accordance with the planes at a low altitude. There is a brief moment when you feel excellent because you've achieved what was required, and then you get very vigilant. You get hundreds of miles to fly, some of them in an area full of missiles. And we were very focused on an escape route because it could elicit surprises. According to the plan, upon hitting the target, all planes were required to report to the others over the communications network. Following that, one of the X-16s was supposed to broadcast the word Arizona on a long-range radio back to Tel Aviv to indicate that the target had been bombed according to plan. All 8 planes confirmed a precise hit and returned to the radio blackout. When the F-16 crew reported Arizona, it was 12:25 a.m. Israel time on Friday, September 6th. Amir relates that a number of years later, he watched the video that had been filmed in the command post during the attack. Everyone there is jumping up and down in excitement like in a Hollywood movie. At 1:30, we got back to Israel and landed at the base. Our assumption was that possibly the operation would get revealed publicly and the Syrians would respond, and then it would become an opening move in a war. In the underground hangar that our plane returned to, Brigadier General Shelley Gutman, the commander of the Hatzerim base, was waiting. He was waiting for us outside the planes as we landed with hugs. He was usually a pretty reserved person. I can't remember him ever hugging me on any other occasion, but this time he was all smiles, and Shelley said to us, "You are champions." On the way back, in order to reduce weight and to save fuel, one of the planes jettisoned an empty fuel container. The tank landed on the Turkish side of the Syrian-Turkish border, creating 2 problems. First, the incident and the photo of the tanks with Hebrew writing on them were evidence that an Israeli force had been in the area. Second, it caused a huge embarrassment vis-a-vis Turkey, which at the time was a country friendly to Israel. Even though Recep Tayyip Erdogan was already serving as prime minister, in their Air Force, they characterized the release of the fuel tank into Turkey as an operational error. Rightly so. I agree that that was an error. Although tactically, it was possible to have justified the crew's considerations. The hitch, however, did not cast a pall on the success of the operation. After the attack, Ashkenazi sent MI Chief Yadlin to the Turkish Chief of Staff to explain the considerations and circumstances and to reassure him that there had been absolutely no violation of Turkish sovereignty during the operation. The Turks were not happy, but they decided not to make an issue of it, apparently in part because of their retrospective realization that a threat to them was also inherent in Assad's secret project. The lack of immediate response from the regime reinforced prior intelligence hypothesis that Syria would show restraint following the attack. Shakidi emerged from the control booth in the command post only after the planes were out of range of danger. I went to Olmert. Both of us were very excited. We had a big hug. I said to him, the Air Force did what it was assigned to do. The Prime Minister celebrated the achievements by raising a toast. Hear, hear. There was a crazy high all around him, said one of those who were present. His Chief of Staff, Yoram Turkovich, in a state of total euphoria, said to Olmert, "You can resign now. You have done your bit for the people of Israel." The day after Arizona, shortly thereafter, Olmert phone called President Bush, who was on a visit to Australia that week. The two spoke at Olmert's request on a secure line. Quote, "Do you remember something in the north that was bothering me?" said the prime minister to the president. "It isn't there anymore," unquote. Bush replied, "Very good." The following afternoon, the Syrian news agency issued a laconic statement to the effect that during the night, air defense systems had chased away Israeli planes that had penetrated Syrian's airspace. In Israel, they saw this mendacious statement without many details as reinforcement of the assessment that Assad intended to show restraint. The silence on Israel's side, which overall was maintained in accordance with the advanced planning, helped reduce the sense of humiliation felt by the Syrian president and gave credence to his range of plausible deniability. Immediately after the attack, Israel embarked on a diplomatic blitz that had been prepared in advance by the Prime Minister's Bureau, the Mossad, the MI, and the Foreign Ministry. Top Israeli officials, most of them intelligence people, set out for Western countries and a number of friendly countries in the region to share the incriminating information about the secret Syrian reactor. The detailed intelligence helped convince those countries of the justice of the Israeli move and neutralize the possibility that the attack would become the cause of an international scandal. The Syrian silence helped this. "It is a story that ended well," says Amos Yadlin. "There was successful cooperation here among the intelligence organization and between us and the government. And it was an extraordinary process at the end of which the reactor was destroyed." Yeah, we're going to do another one. We're going to do another one. So stay tuned. Right after this, we're going to actually do another Mossad story. This one is really cool. This one's really good. I saved the best for last for sure. Before we go into the break, though, I wanted to mention that there's this thing called the Flick app. And it's like a messaging app built around podcast RSS feed. It's hard to kind of describe. But they reached out to me and asked me to help with their soft rollout. So I am on there. So see the show notes for the Flick app link and the code to kind of get on to my thing. I believe that this is going to be the future. I think that this is going to fill a void, especially for folks that want to get the hell away from Facebook and Twitter. So check it out. I'm still brand new on it and I'm still figuring out, but check out in the show notes the information for the Flick app and see if it's for you. If you are a person that likes a lot of podcasts like I am, this might be worth your time because I think that this is going to be like the next thing. All right. So there, I did that bit of business for them. So now I'm going to do a little bit of business for myself.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content and access to the private Abracast workgroup by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com. On this month's exclusive Order of the Fellowcraft episode.
Towards Mount Rainier, he saw 9 gleaming discs outlined against the snow, each one about the size of a C-54. Is it a function of false reporting? Is it a function of media incompetence or straight up misinformation? from my point of view, every, quote, flying saucer, unquote, story from this point on is at least a suspect for some sort of corruption. It has been over 2 years since the puzzling death of Captain Mantell. Mantell died mysteriously in the skies south of Fort Knox, but before his radio went silent, he sent a strange message to Goodman Air Force Base.
Support the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
اليهود له نمط خاص لأننا نتحدث عن قوم لم تبقى صفة قبيحة إلا ووسموا بها، وأقولها ليهود علنا: لقد آن أوان ذبحكم، لقد آن أوان قتالكم. لقد آن أوان قتلكم، وإنا بإذن الله لها، نحن والمسلمين الصادقين المخلصين وجيوش دولة الخلافة الإسلامية التي ستأتي إلى هذه الأرض لتحررها من أدناسكم. ونحن ننتظر اليوم وننتظر اللحظة، ولن نرحم، ولن نرحم، ولن نرحم. اللهم عجل بهذا اليوم يا الله، اللهم عجل بيوم يهوذا يا الله، اللهم عجل بيوم قتل بيوم يهوذا يا الله، اللهم عجل بيوم قتل بيوم يهوذا يا الله، اللهم عجل بيوم قتلهم، اللهم عجل بيوم قتالهم.
All right, so this one is going to come from a book called Mossad, The Greatest Missions of the Israeli Secret Service. It's the whole chapter 16 of the book, and it's entitled Saddam's Supergun. I love this. This one starts out with a little history lesson. Going back in time to March 23rd, 1918. At the height of World War I, a huge artillery shell exploded in the center of Place de République in Paris. An hour later, another shell hit the center of Paris, killing 8 people. The explosion terrified the Parisians, since the city, far away from the front lines, was supposed to be safe. The commander of the Paris district immediately sent several squads to scan the forests around the capital, where a German artillery unit must have been hiding. But the search turned up nothing. The French surmised that the shells had been fired from an airship, even though no Zeppelin had been sighted. 6 days later, on Good Friday, another shell exploded in Paris. This time it was a direct hit to St. Gervais Church. The explosion killed 91 people and wounded 100. Panic spread through the city. Army patrols fanned out from the capital and didn't find anything. No one had ever heard of a cannon that could hit Paris from such a fantastic a distance. The newspapers compared the monster that bombarded them from afar with a huge cannon that writer Jules Verne had described in his book From the Earth to the Moon. Jules Verne's fictional cannon fired a whole spaceship to the moon. The French were in luck. The war ended that same year with the victory of the Allies over Imperial Germany. Slowly, information started trickling about the horrible cannon that had spread death and panic in the French capital. Some called it the Paris gun. After Germany's emperor, it turned out that it had been developed by the Krupp heavy weapons industry, which had produced 3 of these mysterious cannons. The cannons had an unheard of range of 128 kilometers. Its shells were 3 feet long and a charge of gunpowder that was 12 feet long. The shells soared to a height of 42 kilometers, a record that was broken only by the German V-2 rockets in World War II. Krupp assembled the 3 superguns in utmost secrecy. Each of the guns were pulled by special trains that moved from one position to another almost daily. Each was manned by 80 artillery soldiers who were forbidden to speak to anybody. It was imperative to shroud the monstrous weapon in complete secrecy. As the war approached its end, the maneuvering capabilities of the supergun quickly deteriorated. British aircraft discovered the huge guns, hounded them along the rails, and kept bombing them. The French, too, fired at them from positions close to the front line, yet none of the attacks were successful. The only gun that was neutralized was one that exploded while firing. 5 soldiers were killed. The other 2 vanished without a trace at the war's end, and what happened to them remains a mystery. They may have been dismantled or concealed in some deep cave or an abandoned mine. The superguns turned into legend, and many thought their secrets would never be solved. But in 1965, an elderly woman arrived in Canada and met a 37-year-old scientist, Dr. Gerald Bull, who was in charge of the high-altitude research program at a university in Montreal. This is not to be confused with our HARP, with the invisible laser beams and the chemtrails and all that. This is a different HARP program. The woman was a relative of Fritz Rausenberger, the deceased director of design at Krupp Industries. She brought a lost manuscript that she had discovered in her family archives, which described in detail the big gun and the way it operated. The manuscript fired up Bull's imagination, and he was reputed to be a genius who had received his PhD at the age of 23, the youngest PhD to graduate from a Canadian university. Bull dreamt of building superguns that would fire shells at targets hundreds of miles away and even launch satellites into outer space. Using the manuscript, he wrote a book about the superguns and the possibilities they offered to the scientists of the future. The book was not enough. Bull obtained funding from the U.S. and Canadian governments, as well as from his universities. On a testing ground in Barbados, he tested his own huge gun, the longest gun ever built in the world. It was 36 meters long with a caliber of 424 millimeters. Hundreds of workers, technicians, and engineers, many of them local, participated in building and testing of the formidable firearm. Bull's cannon in the test firing and dispatched heavy loads to record altitudes. He claimed that if, instead of small shells, he armed the guns with missiles propelled by solid fuel, He could fire a 200-pound missile to a distance of 4,000 kilometers or to an altitude of 250 kilometers. Bull's gun was a great achievement, but the U.S. and Canadian governments decided, for various reasons, to stop funding the project. In 1968, Bull was forced to leave Barbados, and his frustration knew no limits. With spite and hatred, he attacked the bureaucrats who had aborted his project. For a while, he produced artillery shells and even exported 50,000 shells to Israel for use with American-made guns. He was even rewarded an honorary American citizenship, but he had a very short fuse and was not able to control his mouth. He clashed with most senior officers and officials he met. The humiliation that he had felt at the closure of his test range in Barbados kept burning inside him. And he was ready to do anything in order to continue building his big guns. It became his obsession, and nothing could stop him. First, he built the GC-45 gun, the most advanced gun of his time, and had a range of 40 kilometers. Bull sold the gun to anybody who wanted to buy it, in spite of the United Nations embargo on weapon sales to South Africa. Bull sold his guns to its army, which needed them for war against neighboring Angola. He not only was fighting a sweater, but also sold South Africa a license to build the gun on its territory. Some say the CIA secretly supported Bull's illegal activities, but as soon as the matter became public, Bull's CIA friends vanished into thin air. He remained alone, exposed to the UN's accusations of having become a cynical, heartless arms trafficker. He was forced to return to the United States, where an unpleasant surprise awaited him. An American court found him guilty of illegal weapons trade and sentenced him to 6 months in jail. 6 months? When he was released, he returned to Canada and was fined $55,000. Angry and bitter, he moved to Belgium, where he found a new company and associated with the United Gunpowder Works. His obsession did not subside. He kept dreaming of building a huge supergun worthy of Jules Verne's imagination, like Goethe's Faust. He was ready to sell his soul to the devil for realizing his dream. And indeed, he found the devil, Iraq's megalomaniac dictator, Saddam Hussein. In the 80s, Iraq was fighting a ruthless war against Iran. Bull sold the Iraqis 200 GC-45 guns made in Austria and smuggled via the port of Aqaba in neighboring Jordan. But that was only the beginning. Saddam Hussein, like Bull, was deeply frustrated with Israel after Israel bombed the Tammuz nuclear reactor and shattered his dream to make Iraq a nuclear power. And he was also utterly jealous that Israel was on the verge of launching satellites into space. Bull offered to build Saddam the biggest and the longest supergun in the world. With his gun, Bull promised Saddam would be able to launch satellites into space and fire shells to a distance of more than 1,000 kilometers. Saddam realized that he would be able to hit the population centers of Israel and gladly accepted Bull's offer. Bull called his enterprise Project Babylon. Bull drew up the plans for Babylon, a gun, 150 meters long, weighing 2,100 tons with a caliber of 1 meter. But before building this mammoth gun, he decided to assemble a smaller prototype for testing purposes, and he called the smaller gun Baby Babylon. Even though this baby was bigger than all of its ancestors, the gun was 45 meters long, and Saddam's artillery commander was awed by its performance. But this was nothing compared to the real thing that was emerging from the Iraqi desert. Bull chose to place his giant gun on a bare hill, positioning the components of the longest and the fattest gun in the world on a rising slope. After choosing the location, he ordered the parts of his cannon from various European steel plants. The main component, of course, was the barrel that Bull intended to assemble. Using scores of huge steel tubes, he ordered the tubes in England, Spain, Holland, and Switzerland. The orders were camouflaged as parts of a large oil pipeline because Iraq was subject to draconian international restrictions on the importation of strategic materials. Once again, the orders were filled in the name of neighboring Jordan. The pipes began arriving. The amazing aspect of the entire operation was that most of the states and the companies involved in the production of the pipes understood perfectly well that the pipes were nothing but parts for a giant lethal weapon. But their cynicism and greed, as well as their indifference to the wars in the Middle East, meant that they had no problem cooperating. The huge pipes were given export license, loaded onto freighters, and sent their way. Many of them reached Iraq without any trouble. Bull's private army of technicians and engineers started assembling the gun pieces, pointing them west towards Israel, but Bull was not satisfied. He built the Iraqis 2 self-propelled guns, Al-Majnoon and Al-Fayo. Al-Majnoon is translated to the crazy one, was immediately integrated into Iraq's artillery. Bull also agreed to improve the Scud missiles in Saddam's arsenal and modify their warheads. He extended the Scud's range and their performance. These missiles would be used against Israel during the first Gulf War. As a person of my particular age, I remember how big of a deal these Scud missiles were. In my formative years, hearing about Scud missiles, hearing about the terror of the Scud missiles. Here, though, Bull crossed a line. According to Bull's son's testimony, Israeli agents warned Bull to stop his dangerous activities, and Bull refused to listen. Israel was not alone in its desire to stop the scientists. The CIA, the MI6 were also worried. The Iranians, too, had unfinished business with Bull. During the Iran-Iraq War, the Iraqis had used the guns built by Bull against them. Apparently, Bull did not suffer from a lack of enemies, and they were determined to put an end to his projects. He ignored the warnings. The foreign agents stepped up their activities several times during the winter of 1990. Unknown persons broke into Bull's apartment at the Uccle neighborhood in Brussels, and they took nothing. They just overturned the furniture and emptied the cupboards and the chest drawers, leaving clear indications of their visit. That was another warning for Bull. They were here. We can get into your home as we please, and we may even go further than that. Once again, Bull ignored the warnings. The gun parts kept arriving and were placed one after the other on the barren hill in Iraq. It seemed that no action could stop Project Babylon except one. On March 22nd, 1990, Bull returned to his Brussels apartment where he was fumbling in his pocket for the apartment keys. A man emerged from a dark corner, a silenced gun in his hand, and fired 5 bullets into the back of Bull's head. The father of the great gun collapsed and died on the spot. The world press plunged into speculation about the identity of the killers. Some said the assassins had been sent by the CIA. Others pointed at MI6. But most of the observers agreed on Israel. The Belgian police started an investigation, but did not find a thing. The murderers of Gerald Bull have yet to be found, but with Bull's death, work on the big gun immediately stopped. His assistants, engineers, researchers, buyers scattered through the world. They were familiar with parts of the project, but the master plan was locked in Bull's head, and only he knew how to proceed. Bull's death was also the death of Babylon. 2 weeks after Bull's death, the British authorities emerged from their long slumber, and they finally dispatched a customs unit to the port of Teesport, where they seized 8 huge Sheffield steel pipes listed on the escort manifest as oil pipes. It was a nice try, but too late. The British had missed 44 other oil pipes that were already in service in Iraq, and in the following weeks, more components of the giant gun were seized in 5 other European countries. An official investigation in Sigland tried to establish how respectable companies like Sheffield Forge Masters could ignore Saddam Hussein's devious goals and supply steel pipes for these big guns. When the U.S. Army conquered Iraq in 2003, they found piles of huge pipes slowly gathering rust in a junkyard about 30 miles south of Baghdad. The rusted pipes were all that were left of the grandiose plans of Dr. Gerald Bull. Gerald Bull's assassination came at a time of profound change in the Mossad's character. The new Mossad, veteran Mossad agent Shabati Shavit, found a very different service from the Mossad used to be when he assumed his duties in '89. The former Seret Macau fighter, and he seemed the right man for the job, but starting in the early 70s with the systematic elimination of leaders of Black September and so much more. So in the 80s and 90s, the emphasis of Mossad activity shifted from intelligence to special operations. The Mossad gradually had to assume most of the operations against non-military and non-conventional dangers threatening the state of Israel. The former state organs were unable to efficiently defeat terrorism. The terrorist leaders lived abroad in relative safety, planned their attacks, and dispatched their men against Israel or citizens throughout the world. Even when Israel knew who they were and what they were doing, they could not arrest them and bring them to justice. The only way left for the Mossad to find them and kill them. These were brutal, utterly trying actions for those like David Mollad, who carried them out, and they achieved their goals. And when killing of the terrorist leaders wiped out or immobilized their organization for many years, they hunt for Black September leaders. Was the best example. Gerald Bull case had similar results, even though his assassination were never officially identified. The death was also the death of his evil projects. It was the same with Wadi Haddad. It all started with a box of chocolates. Dr. Wadi Haddad, the head of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, was one of the most dangerous enemies of Israel. His most notorious operation had been the hijacking of an Air France plane on its way to Tel Aviv to Paris, on June 27th, 1976. Several terrorist Arabs, Germans, South Americans forced the pilot to land in the capital of Uganda and demanded the exchange of the Jewish and Israeli hostages for the world's most dangerous terrorists. In a heroic rescue operation, Israeli commandos flew thousands of miles, landed in Entebbe, killed the terrorists, and liberated the hostages. After Entebbe, Haddad realized that his life was in danger, and he moved to his headquarters to Baghdad, where he felt safe from Iraq. He continued to launch terrorist operations against Israel. The Mossad was determined to kill the arch-terrorist, but how? A painstaking operation was launched, the goal of discovering everything about Haddad, mostly his weaknesses and his vices. A year after Entebbe rescue, the Mossad agents found that Haddad adored chocolate, especially fine Belgian chocolate. The information on Haddad's secret vice came from a reliable Palestinian who had infiltrated Haddad's Popular Front. The Mossad presented the information to Israel's new prime minister, who immediately approved the operation. Mossad's agent then recruited one of Haddad's trusted aides, who was on a mission in Europe. On his return, he brought his boss a big box of mouth-watering Godiva chocolates Mossad agents injected with a deadly biological poison into the chocolates, filled with sweet cream. They assumed that Haddad, who craved Godiva, would gobble up all the chocolates himself and would not even think of sharing them with anybody. The agent brought the gift-wrapped box to Haddad, who, once alone, wolfed down the chocolates, each and every one of them. In a few weeks, the plump Haddad started losing his appetite and losing weight. The blood test performed by his doctors indicated a severe immune deficiency. Nobody in Baghdad understood what was happening to the leader of the Popular Front. Haddad's health worsened. He became weak, skeletal. He was confined to his bed, and his state became critical. He was urgently transferred to an East German clinic. Like most countries of the Soviet bloc, East Germany offered generous support, training, weapons, and refuge to the Palestinian terrorists. But their otherwise top-notch expertise did not help this time. The East German doctors could not save Haddad, and on March 30th, 1978, he died of unknown causes. The 48-year-old terrorist leader left his sister millions of dollars he had personally hoarded while leading his patriotic war for Palestine. The German doctors' diagnosis was Haddad had died from some sort of terminal disease that had attacked his immune system. Nobody suspected Mossad. Some of Haddad's closest aides accused the Iraqi authorities of poisoning him because he embarrassed the regime. Only after many years were Israeli writers allowed to publish the truth about Mossad's involvement in Haddad's untimely death. When Yasser Arafat died 30 years later, his aides accused Israel of causing his death. This accusation was never proven, despite the thorough examination and tests run by Arafat's French doctors. With Haddad's death, his lethal organization collapsed. The attacks by Haddad's group, Israel, ceased almost completely, and the long battle with one of Israel's vilest enemies was definitely over. After Bull and Haddad, it was Shakiki's turn. In the middle of the 19th century, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire sent the commander of the Imperial Navy, a famous and admired admiral, to conquer the Mediterranean island of Malta. The admiral set sail and wandered for many months in the Mediterranean. He did not find Malta. The admiral returned to Istanbul, which was once Constantinople. Why'd they change it? I don't know. People just liked it better that way. He reported to the Sultan and announced Malta Yak. In Turkish, that means there is no Malta. But in our times, there are some who found Malta. Not only found the island, but also found a man there who arrived in disguise, under the assumed identity, traveling in total secrecy. This was Dr. Fathi Shakiki, the head of Islamic Jihad. On October 26, 1995, in the late morning, Fathi Shakiki came out of the Diplomat Hotel in the town of Selma in Malta. He was on his way to do some shopping before returning to Damascus. There he had been living for the last few years. Shakiki was wearing a wig and carrying a Libyan passport in the name of Ibrahim Shawish. He felt quite safe in the serene Maltese town. He did not know that several Mossad agents had been shadowing him since he flew a week before from Malta to Libya to participate in a conference of underground Palestinian organizations. 9 months before that, on January 22nd, 2 suicide bombers, members of Shakiki's Islamic Jihad, killed themselves close to a bus station at the Beit Lid Junction, not far from the city of, Netyana. 21 people were killed, most of them were soldiers, and 68 were wounded. It was one of the bloodiest terror attacks in Israeli history. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who rushed to Beit Lid, was deeply shocked by the carnage, and his wrath peaked when he read Shakiki's boasts in a Time magazine interview that, quote, "It was the biggest military attack ever inside Palestine, outside the Arab-Israeli walls." Time asked, "It seems to give you satisfaction," and Shakiki responded, "It gives satisfaction to our people." The furious Rabban, not Rabban, that's the beast Rabban from Dune. The furious Rabin ordered a career Mossad officer to kill the head of the Islamic Jihad, Shavitz, who had been stalking Shakiki for some time. So this is interesting. This is an interesting, we just did 9/11 in context. We did 3 9/11 in context episodes 2 weeks ago. And the last one was all about all the times Clinton skipped out on not killing Osama bin Laden. I think we counted 8 or 9 times. Rubio counts 4 times, whatever. He's not reading the same 9/11 report as we're reading, I guess. So this is a great mirror. This is a great way. This is how a leader acts, as opposed to a lawyer. I recommend you guys listen to all of those episodes if you haven't yet. Even though 9/11 is, it's a few weeks away or whatever. According to Der Spiegel, it's getting long in the tits, guys. I'm just trying to get this thing over with. According to Der Spiegel Weekly, the Mossad proposed to hit Shakiki in his Damascus headquarters, but Rabin refused. He was secretly engaged in peace talks with Syria's president, and did not want to jeopardize the slim chances of ending the conflict with Israel's northern neighbor. Rabin asked the Mossad to propose alternative plans for the operation. It was a very complicated mission, Shavitz explained, because Shakiki knew he was in the Mossad's crosshairs. That was why he rarely left Syria. Nevertheless, Rabin refused to authorize a hit in Damascus and ordered Mossad to carry out an operation outside of Syria's borders. This is crazy. But where? For a while, the Mossad leaders were at a loss. But finally, as luck would have it, Shakiki was invited to a conference of Palestinian terrorist organizations, the Legion of Doom, in Libya. At first, he replied that he would not come, but then he was told that his arch rival, the head of the hated Abu Musa organization, intended to participate in the conference. The Mossad experts assumed that Shakiki would not cede the floor to his adversary, and he would come to the conference at all cost. And indeed, a secret report from Damascus confirmed Shakiki was going to Libya. In Jerusalem, Rabin gave the go-ahead. European sources claim that the preparations for the hit started when the Mossad terrorist experts checked the records of Shakiki's former flights in Libya. It turned out that he always chose to fly to Tripoli via Malta. The Mossad decided to operate in Malta and not Libya. Malta was a more convenient and quiet location. Mossad agents waited at Valletta Airport for Shakiki, who was supposed to make a short stop over there on his way to Libya. Shakiki almost fooled his followers by landing in Malta on the third daily flight from Damascus in an elaborate disguise. He spent a short while in the transit lounge and took a connecting flight to Libya. On October 26th, in the early morning, he came back to Malta and he checked into the Diplomat Hotel where he stayed previously. He got room 616 and left the hotel immediately. 2 Mossad agents riding a blue motorcycle followed him wherever he went. He spent a couple of hours visiting shops and markets, and he was on his way back to the hotel when the blue motorcycle stopped beside him. One of the agents, later described as a man with Middle Eastern features, approached and fired bullets at him from close range with the silenced gun. Shakiki collapsed on the sidewalk while his killer ran to a nearby alley where his partner was waiting on the motorcycle. Engine running, they darted towards the nearby beach and jumped aboard a speedboat that took them to a freighter waiting in the high sea. The boat officially carried cement from Haifa to Italy, but besides the cement, it carried another load. Shabbatai Shavitz himself, who monitored the operation from an improvised command post on board. The getaway route had been well planned. Nobody followed the 2 agents as they reached the mothership safe and sound. After Shakiki's death, his aides at the Islamic Jihad tried to unravel a major mystery. Who was the traitor that had leaked the details about his trip to the Mossad? The killers knew everything. The date of his departure from Malta, the flight number, the false identity, the date of his return to Malta and Damascus. And after a 5-month investigation, the Islamic leaders arrested a Palestinian student who was a close assistant to Shakiki and accused him of treason. The student broke under interrogation and confessed that he had been recruited by Mossad while studying in Bulgaria. His handlers instructed him to move to Damascus to join Shakiki's group. During the next 4 years, he had gained Shakiki's confidence and even became one of the few to know about Shakiki's activity. Unlike the Hamas and the Hezbollah, which invested a large part of their resource into social activities, the Islamic Jihad had one sole purpose: terror. It was based on a very small and compartmentalized number of cells composed of Palestinians who had no other purpose but to fight Israel. Shakiki himself was considered by the Palestinian diaspora to be the ideological father of suicide terrorism. He was the first to find in Islam's holy teaching a legitimacy for suicide bombings and killings. Shakiki was responsible for a long list of bloody terror attacks. 16 dead in the attack on the 405 bus on the road from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem on July 6, 1989. 9 dead in the attack of the bus of Israeli tourists close to Cairo on February 4, 1990. 8 dead in the bombing of the bus by Kfar Darom in South Israel on November 20th, 2000. 3 soldiers killed in a suicide attack on Netzarim roadblock in the Gaza Strip in November 11th, 1994. And the terrible bombing in Beit Lid, where 21 people died on January 22nd, 1995. He had rightfully earned the death sentence that Mossad carried out in Malta street after Shakiki's death. The Islamic Jihad almost collapsed, and it took years for the organization to recover from the death of its leader. Israel never assumed responsibility for the assassination. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin said, "I did not know about the assassination, but if it is true, I shall not be sorry." Hey, I'm John. This is the Abercast. Thank you to all the supporters out there. I appreciate it. And keep on keeping on.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review. On this month's exclusive Order of the Fellowcraft episode.
Towards Mount Rainier, he saw 9 gleaming discs outlined against the snow, each one about the size of a C-54. Is it a function of false reporting? Is it a function of media incompetence or straight up misinformation? From my point of view, every, quote, flying saucer, unquote, story from this point on is at least a suspect for some sort of corruption. It has been over 2 years since the puzzling death of Captain Mantell. Mantell died mysteriously in the skies south of Fort Knox, but before his radio went silent, he sent a strange message to Goodman Air Force Base.
Support the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.